Welcome to part 2 of the Chapter 6 test review. In this portion, we are going to explore numbers 7 through 12. We're going to work with simplifying with exponents, and 9 is solving with exponents. 10, what do you do when you have a binomial on one side? 11 is a composite function, and 12 will be finding the inverse. So let's get started. Our favorite type of problem, number 7. Number 7 is simplifying your exponents. There is no equal sign in this problem. You cannot multiply the power by its reciprocal. And I'll say it one more time. You cannot multiply the power by its reciprocal. I have to work with the numbers that I've been given. If there's an equal sign, like in number, 7, 8, 9, with an equal sign here, this is an equation. I can multiply by a reciprocal to get rid of it. But when you're simplifying something, you just have to work with what you've been given. So, let's separate things into numbers and letters. X to the 5th over x, y to the 10th over y squared. So I'm going to set aside that 3/4 power for a moment, and I'm going to just look at all the stuff on the inside. And let's see what we can simplify first. 16 and 81, they can't reduce, so I'm going to move over to my x's. X to the 5th divided by x, well, that x cancels out, leaving me with x to the 4th. Y to the 10th over y squared. The 2 cancel out, leaving me 8 on top. So you have 10 of the y's, 2 of them cancel out, leaving you with 8 y's on top. Now let's take a look at our 3/4 power. So this is 16 over 81, x to the 4th, y to the 8th. All of that to the 3/4. Everything inside those parentheses is going to be raised to the 3/4 power. So I'm going to go ahead and distribute it. This 3/4 goes to the 16, 16 to the 3/4, and to the 81. 81 to the 3/4. It goes to the x. X already has a power, so when I'm doing a power with a power, I multiply them together. 4 times 3/4. And the y, it already has a power, so again, I'm going to take 8 times the power of 3/4. So y 8 times 3/4. And let's start to reduce. 16 to the 3/4, you can do that in your calculator. To type it in, it's 16. Some people call this symbol a caret or a hat. It's an upper arrow, which tells the calculator what's coming next is the power. So 16 raised to the power of 3/4. You have to use parentheses. If you don't use parentheses, the calculator won't know that both the 3 and the 4 are the power. 16 to the 3/4 power is, let's see, to 8. I'm doing the same thing with 81, raised to the 3/4. Let's see, 4th root of 81 is 3, cubed is 27. All right, looking at our x, I have 4 times 3, which is 12, divided by 4, leaves me with x3. Looking at my y's, 8 times 3 is 24, divided by 4 is 6. Let's bring everything together in our final answer. 27 here is still in the denominator, so it's 8x cubed y to the 6th all over 27. So as you tackle this problem, try to look at each portion individually. Look at your numbers, look at your x's, look at your y's, simplify what's inside parentheses, and then distribute your power. Let's look at an example now where you have a power to a negative. What do we do with these negative powers? A negative exponent means that we're going to end up dividing in order to change that exponent to a positive. What I mean by that is, right here is that negative. So to deal with it, making it a positive, I take this entire term and move it to a denominator. This is 8x to the 15th, still to the 1/3 power. But now because I've divided it, I've changed it into the denominator, it's a positive 1/3. In dealing with exponents, you have to have positive exponents. Like my previous example, I'm going to take that 1/3 and I'm going to move it to both the 8 and to the 15. The 15 is already a power, so you multiply when you have double powers. 15 times 1/3. The 8 did not have a power with it, it was just a power of 1, so it's 8 to the 1/3. Right? Using my calculator, 8 raised to the 1/3 power gives me 2. And the 15 times the 1/3 gives me 5. Let's bring this all together for our final answer. This is all still in the denominator. I still have this 1 here in the numerator. So it's 1 over 2x to the 5th. Negative exponents. Move them to the denominator. If they're in the denominator already, move them up to the numerator. All right, let's look at a different type of problem now. When you have an equal sign, I don't just have to simplify. Now I'm going to solve for x. Right, to get rid of a fraction, you would multiply by the reciprocal. These are powers, though. This is not 8 times 4/3. It's 8 to the power of 4/3. So when you type it in your calculator, make sure you raise it to the power of 4/3. These cancel. I have x plus 6 equals 8 cubed is 2, to the 4th is 16. Solve for x. Subtract the 6 from both sides. X equals 10. When there's an equation, your final answer has to say x equals something or y equals something. When it's an expression, no equal sign, you should not have an equal sign in your answer. Moving on to number 10. What do we do now when we have a binomial on the other side? Well, to get rid of a square, to get rid of a square root, we are going to square. Square a square root makes the whole thing disappear. So I am left with x plus 7, exactly what I want. If I square one side, I have to square the other side. X plus 1 is a binomial. It is together. In order to square, you have to keep them together. This is the same thing as x plus 1 times x plus 1. This is x plus 1 twice. And when you have this written out, you get to FOIL. So I'm going to go ahead and push pause and FOIL this out. When you FOIL, bring it back into the original equation, x squared plus 2x plus 1. That came from FOILing. All right, I'm going to start solving. I need to set this equal to 0, move the x over, move the 7. So I have 0 on one side, x squared plus x minus 6. And when you're moving things to one side, you always want this x squared part to be positive. So always add or subtract over to wherever the x squared is at. Now we get to do our second favorite thing in math, and we get to factor. I took a times c, a is 1, times negative 6. What multiplies to give me negative 6, and adds to give me positive 1. And that positive 1 came right here from the b term. I would do 3 times negative 2, divide it by your a term, which is just a 1, and you can set up your answer. Your answer is the opposite of your factors. So if I have positive 3 for my factor, that means x is equal to negative 3. If I have negative 2 as my factor, that means x is equal to positive 2. And now I need to go back to my very original equation and check and see if both of those work out. Here's my work showing when I checked my answer. With the negative 3, it came out that 2 does not equal negative 2. So, sorry about that. So 2 or negative 3 does not work out. Looking over here at x equals 2, I get 3 equals 3. Therefore, 2 is my answer. If I ask you to check for extraneous solutions, that's what I'm looking for. One answer works, one answer doesn't. Moving on now to composite functions. Working on a composite, that open circle does not mean multiplication. It means that I'm going to start with the g of 2. That tells me that x is equal to 2 in my g function. Whatever is right next to the number, that's where we start. So working on g of 2, I get 2 squared minus 1, 4 minus 1, which is 3. I then move that 3 into my f function. That means in the f function, x is equal to 3. So I have 5 times 3 minus 4. 15 minus 4 is 11. And my final answer is 11. And our last example is finding the inverse. Finding the inverse means the same thing as reverse. Reversing my x and y. F of x can be rewritten as y equals. So I'm going to switch the y and the x. So I have x is equal to y plus 2 squared minus 4. Solving for y, I'm going to add the 4 to the other side. X plus 4 is equal to y plus 2 squared. To get rid of a square, I'm going to take the square root. And if I square root one side, I square root both sides. And if you put a square root into an equation, you have to consider both the positive and the negative portion. So now I have plus or minus the square root of x plus 4 equal to y plus 2. That's a y. It's a really thick y plus 2. Subtract the 2. I'm going to go ahead and put it in front. And my final answer, y inverse, that's the little -1, is equal to -2 plus or minus the square root of x plus 4. And I'm not going to graph in this example. If you'd like to see more on graphing, go back to lesson 6, 7, I think. And that concludes the Chapter 6 test review.